Hi, my name is Allison Wareham, and I'm going to be sharing with you my doctoral dissertation on moral distress. So I've been a nurse for almost 13 years, and a lot of that experience is in the acute care area, including the emergency department. And while I worked in the emergency department, I had a lot of great stories and great experiences. But when I would come home, I would be upset, I would be frustrated, I would be sad. And I wouldn't know why. It wasn't necessarily the things that they talked to us about in nursing school, where you're going to be a nurse, expect that you're going to see sad things, but it was more the ethical dilemmas that I was dealing with and facing with and not knowing how to deal with them. So ultimately, I ended up leaving the emergency department and working in a different unit, but I still wondered what was going on and what was going on with the nurses that I worked with. And there is a concept called moral distress, and it had actually been identified decades before I even became a nurse, but I had no idea what it was or why it was happening. But before we go into why we should care about moral distress, I think we also need to be aware that there's a nursing shortage crisis, and I'm sure that you have all heard of that. So why do we care about that? Because in 10 years, that number is just going to increase by 5 times, up to over 500,000 shortage of nurse positions. And another reason that we should worry and care about that is that in the first year, while we keep graduating nurses in the first year of practice, a quarter of those nurses are leaving their first nursing job. They're identifying that it's related to professional stress, and professional stress is strongly correlated with moral distress, and research shows that 1 in 3 nurses will experience moral distress at some point in their nursing career. So to look at my dissertation, I used the theoretical framework of oppressed group behavior. And the reason that I chose oppressed group behavior is because I wanted to look at why does moral distress affect some nurses and not? And why does it seem to affect more women than men? And I looked at oppressed group behavior. This is a theory that looks at individuals that have been oppressed due to the color of their skin, due to the religious beliefs that they share, or just from being a woman. So I wanted to look at that theoretical framework. And there's a component of oppressed group behavior, which is self-silencing, again, which is more common among women. So I wanted to investigate that role that it played in moral distress. Counter storytelling is one way that we can share our stories and try to reverse the damage of what social construction of what a woman is and the social construction of what being a nurse is. The previous slide that I showed you was an image of a nurse who is silently looking over patients and was often seen as self-sacrificing. And so that role combined with the social construction of women often leaves the nurse feeling that they can't ask for help when they need it, or they have to silently struggle with what they're dealing with. So I first did theoretical thematic analysis to look at what was that role using the self-silencing model. And in all 12 of the narratives that I collected from practicing registered nurses, self-silencing or the role or being dismissed or not heard were evident in all 12 of them. I also ran another, inductive analysis. That was the word I was looking for. I ran an inductive analysis using those narratives, and I identified that other things that came up were there were personal and professional ramifications to experiencing moral distress. A lot of the emotions range from anger to sadness to regret. Anger was one of the most common ones, and it was listed 14 times, and sadness was 10 times. There were also ramifications of the intent to leave. 7 of the 12 people that responded to my survey, or to my narrative inquiry, 7 of the 12 of them actually identified that they did leave the unit where the moral distress occurred, and then found a job elsewhere. But there were also areas for growth. Of the participants, 6 of the 12 participants did identify that when they were able to work in a facility or a unit where they felt that their voice could be heard, that they felt that their moral distress was able to be managed better. So ultimately, I found that interventions combating moral distress should focus on assertiveness building and advocacy support, but must not ignore or forget the social construction of women, compounded by the historical medical hierarchy system of the role self-silencing plays. Thank you.